So let's imagine that I came to the full-on conclusion that killing animals out of need is wrong. Does this mean that I view indigenous people who are truly killing animals to survive to be as immoral as non-vegans who, in the presence of a bunch of plant-based alternatives, still decide to pay for animals to be exploited and murdered? Hey, what is up, guys? So I want to start a new series on this channel titled something along the lines of discussing tough vegan topics or something like that. Just because I think there's some topics that are just fairly interesting to discuss from a moral perspective. And there are also topics that I feel a lot of vegans tend to be very divided on. And also topics that some vegans can get really toxic about or get really emotional about and be in this sort of mental state where they just are incapable of having a reasonable and calm discussion. Hence why the title of this series is going to be something along the lines of discussing tough vegan topics. Some of these topics are questions related to, is it moral to kill an animal for food out of need? Is it always not vegan to use animal products? Is it moral to have a bunch of animals killed to preserve the health of a carnivorous pet? Should we have empathy for slaughterhouse workers? Is killing off predators a moral thing to do? Should we go out of our way to reduce wild animal suffering? Is a vegan necessarily a better person than a non-vegan? And others. In reading through comment sections related to these topics, I almost always see people from both sides losing their shit and becoming way too emotional. One of the goals of this series is really to just facilitate dialogue between multiple perspectives on these tough topics and get vegans to talk about them in a way that doesn't involve becoming overly emotionally flustered and unreasonable. A primary goal of this channel, outside of helping vegans cope with non-vegan nonsense through my excessive use of sarcasm, has always been to get vegans to think more critically in general. I would say one of the things that sets me apart from a lot of vegans is that I'm not a huge animal lover. I have a big issue with watching animals become harmed, but I'm not necessarily an animal lover, and this is why I think the logical side of veganism is what has always appealed to me the most. It's also why I think that I'm able to discuss these topics without getting triggered or too emotionally clouded. Now, I'm not perfect, and of course I have the capacity to become emotional as well. I mean, I'm not like a fucking robot or something, but still. Before finally delving into the first question I want to address in this series, I want to say that my positions on most of these questions aren't too strong, and that I'm extremely open to having my mind changed. I'm honestly still thinking about a lot of them. And finally, one more thing. As interesting as these topics are from like a moral perspective, and as fun as they are to talk about, I don't necessarily think there's much utility in discussing them when it comes to improving vegan activism. I mean, like, if vegans already have a hard time following them and absorbing them and having these discussions, how hard is it going to be for a non-vegan to, absorb them as well? Convincing non-vegans to go vegan is already hard as it is, so why would we want to make it any more complicated than it already seems? Okay, so let's address the question of, is it moral to kill an animal when it is a need? So just to be clear here, guys, I'm asking if it is moral to kill an animal out of need, not is it vegan to kill an animal out of need, because depending on what definition of veganism you are operating from, you might have room for killing animals out of need. For example, the definition that talks about being practical. Some might say that it's not really practical to just let yourself starve to death and say that, okay, within the confines of that definition of veganism, it's okay to kill an animal out of need. Now to the question. I want to start with covering what I think is an important distinction when it comes to this topic. There is a big distinction between what somebody would do in a situation and what somebody should do. When I make any sort of should statement, for example, person X should not kill an animal, I'm talking specifically about morality and what one should do according to my perception of right and wrong. I am making a prescriptive claim. And when I make a would statement, for example, person X would kill an animal in this situation, I'm just saying descriptively what a person would do, not necessarily what I think they should do. The importance of me pointing out this distinction will make much more sense later in the video. So many vegans agree that in a situation where you need to kill an animal to survive, it is morally okay to do so. Intuitively, I seem to agree with this. At the surface, it just makes sense to think the thought, well, if somebody needs to do something to survive, they kind of have to, therefore, it's okay. However, let's investigate what the logical extension of this attitude is. So to the vegans who believe that it is justified to kill an animal if you need to survive, I have a question. If somebody is in need of a new heart valve, because their own heart valve is defective, is it now moral for that vegan to go ahead and kill a pig in an effort to extract their valve and save themselves? Well, if a vegan accepts this, they're technically being logically consistent within their morals, but let's take this a little further. Operating from this reasoning, would we consider it moral to kill a human being for their heart valve if we needed to survive? And if your mind at the moment is saying, well, humans and pigs are different, let me entertain that thought and ask you, what exactly is the morally relevant difference between a pig and a human, such that it is moral to kill the pig for their valve, but not the human? If the morally relevant difference has something to do with a pig's lower intelligence compared to a human, in order to be consistent, wouldn't you need to consider it moral to kill certain disabled humans for their valves out of need who show no greater degree of intelligence than pigs? Because I personally wouldn't consider it moral to go ahead and do this, I struggle to consider it moral to kill a pig, and by extension animals in general, out of need. Does this mean that I think a person is immoral who kills an animal out of need because they are literally starving to death? Does this also mean that I think a person is immoral who kills an animal because they are in need of a valve replacement? I somewhat struggle to answer these questions. In all honesty, I say now that in a situation where I am starving and need food, that I don't believe I should kill an animal to survive, and that I wouldn't. But I have no clue what it feels like to be starving to the point of going nearly insane, and therefore, I don't know what I would do in a situation where I am literally starving to death. I have an understanding of what I should do, but not what I would do. It's very easy for me right now in this situation where I have an abundance of plant-based foods in my fridge to say, yeah, I wouldn't kill an animal in that situation. But I mean, really try to imagine what it is like to be starving to death. Would I even be the same person? The Danny that I know is the Danny who is in an environment with an abundance of needed resources, who also isn't delusional or insane due to heavy amounts of starvation. So because of thoughts like these, I usually end up saying that I shouldn't kill an animal out of need, but I'm unsure what I would do upon literally going insane and needing to kill an animal to survive. Now, it's clear that somebody in need of a valve replacement is definitely going to be less insane than somebody who is starving to death. So maybe there's less moral wiggle room in the case where somebody needs a valve replacement. I'm not really sure. As I said at the beginning of this video, my thoughts on this topic are pretty loose, so I apologize if this video doesn't seem as concrete as my others. I'm kind of thinking out loud right now, so if you think I'm totally missing something in the addressing of this topic, please let me know in the comments. I also want to mention that I think there is a big distinction between killing out of self-defense to survive and killing an animal out of the need to survive who is not attacking you. If an animal is trying to kill me, I don't see it as morally problematic to defend myself, and I am consistent here because I extend this reasoning to humans. If a human is trying to kill me and I have no choice but to defend myself, I don't see a moral issue with me doing so. So let's imagine that I came to the full-on conclusion that killing animals out of need is wrong. Does this mean that I view indigenous people who are truly killing animals to survive to be as immoral as non-vegans who, in the presence of a bunch of plant-based alternatives, still decide to pay for animals to be exploited and murdered? Well, of course not, because I have a much harder time understanding somebody killing and eating an animal when in the presence of plant-based alternatives versus somebody who isn't in the presence of such alternatives and must kill an animal to survive. This makes even more sense to me when you compare a person starving to death who decides to kill and eat an animal and a person just comfortably living in the first world who decides to kill and eat an animal. All right, guys, that is the end of the video. I hope the video wasn't too convoluted. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Did I miss something? Again, this is a very tough topic, so guys, please be civil in the actual comment section. Oh, also, if you have any tough vegan topics you want me to cover, just leave them in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude, even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who's your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude, even vegans don't get your weird, stupid